Hello, I'm Tom. I'm also known as Recall Singularity on Discord, and I'm a contributor for Space Station 14, which is an open source game about chaos in space. Today I want to demonstrate to you a new feature which allows the lighting system in Space Station 14 to react to darkness by increasing the quality of the lighting. As we're in sandbox mode for this demonstration, I'm going to grant myself full access here. Now I can turn off the lights. Now, in the base version of Space Station 14, if you were to stand somewhere that's relatively dark, you would just have to squint. And the little light you carry would be reasonably powerful. However, in this mode, when you stand somewhere dark, what happens is that the lighting system increases the power of the lights. So areas which are normally lit will now appear dark to you, like ultra bright to you. Let me just create a crowbar so I can get through this doorway. As we stand somewhere that's relatively light, our game will adapt to the lightness. And then with walking back into the darkness, it seems darker again. Standing in the darkness will help you adapt to that. Some objects that create light, like this substation here, will create more light when you're adapted to the darkness. This adaptation means that areas of the game that are otherwise too dark to play in become actually quite pleasant. You'll have to excuse me, I'm playing in a debug build which is affecting the frame rate and making things a bit more jumpy than I'd otherwise be. So with this system, if you stand somewhere that's relatively dark because of lost lighting, the light will slowly increase in power. So as a developer, I can actually look at myself and find out how much power the lighting system has added by viewing my variables, having a look at eye component, and we can see in the eye component, in the eye, there's a setting called exposure, which is increasing. So the higher exposure is, that's kind of a multiplier for the lighting system. So as we stand somewhere that's relatively dark, we get used to this, and the area in the center of the screen becomes a nice shade of lightness, but some areas which are outside of the center and are well lit become overexposed. As we stand somewhere that's more overexposed, it decreases our particular light set point, and so now this area seems correctly exposed, and this area seems too dark. We take an object like a flare. Flares are very, very bright. Standing somewhere very, very bright will cause our exposure to diminish even below 1, which 1 is the normal exposure level that we currently experience in the game. As I walk away from the flares, where the flares were seems ultra bright. The power's gone off very conveniently, because I haven't set up power generation on the station. Ultra bright regions actually are properly overexposed now, so in the previous version you'd see tiles here, it would actually look quite ugly, whereas this just looks very bright. Now, in addition to the exposure settings, so I will go back into the eye, and now we'll go from the eye, we'll go to something called eye traits, which is new. In eye traits, we have an auto expose setting. So I can change in here the thresholds. So if I set maximum to 1, this is how the game normally looks, except this bloom is better than it used to be. There's also something called compression. And what compression is doing is it's taking the white and making it darker. If I increase my light intolerance, I'm essentially reducing the compression. It's not very obvious here actually. If I make the light intolerance very low, interesting, it doesn't seem to be making much of an effect. It's probably because our exposure is so low. If I set the maximum exposure up, we'll once again adjust our eyes. Things here appear very bright, and the light intolerance will change how white that region is. At least it should, but it doesn't seem to be, and I'm not sure why. Interesting. Oh, that's right, I remember. I think this is old, and in order to change that I have to go into the eye again, and that's where the light intolerance is live. There you go, eye component. In the eye, light intolerance is here. So that makes it so that very bright regions become flat, and this amps it up. So the more you increase light intolerance, the brighter bright regions appear on your screen. So we can tune this depending on what we were trying to achieve. I find 0.5 is quite nice. 0.1 is good for ghosts because we want them to be able to handle high exposure regions. So what all these changes really mean for the player is that as the lighting in the station deteriorates, the game gives you more tools to be able to see. Okay, let me grab that crowbar again. So right now, with the regular lighting, you'd be squinting. However, in this case, you actually can still see. If I get a flashlight, you'll see that flashlights, I've actually toned down how powerful they are, but they appear much more powerful because the lighting system is scaling depending on your eyesight. So if you walk somewhere that's fairly well lit, they'll seem not very powerful. But if you walk somewhere where there's hardly any lighting, they're incredibly powerful. So the game just appears more dramatic overall due to the dynamic nature of the lighting system. And if your department suffers power outages, then you're not going to be suffering so much squinting at a screen that's very, very dark. Different races can then have different settings for how much their eyes can adapt. So I've set up humans so that their eyes adapt to a maximum of 10 times lighting, and dwarfs to 12. And we can also add background lights in the center for some players, which will then mean that they can always see in the dark, for instance spiders, although that's not in this build. And that's all I have to show you today. Thank you for watching.